break it to you, but sex education of the past failed us. Because birds and bees, they don't fuck! Welcome to Birds and Bees Don't Fuck, a podcast where we learn exactly how bad our formative sex education, or lack thereof, really was. I'm your host, Arielle Zadok. I'm a sex educator, intimacy coordinator, and a whole lot of other things. My guest today is Eli Olsberg. He's a comedian, writer, and actor who hosts a monthly comedy show in a sex shop. That's right, you can get your tee-hee-hees and toys that tease with Eli in the Pleasure Chest, Los Angeles every month, and it's awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here too, because you're not friends with me yet, so
Yeah.
I'm just like a stranger that comes to your show.
Yeah. And then you're like, would you come do this podcast? Well, we have enough mutual friends that you that was enough vetting. That's how vetting works in 2023. I actually had to think if we were in 2023, but that is like a way of vetting. I'm just like, oh yeah, when we follow each other on the socials, I just saw, I'm like, oh yeah, we have like enough mutual friends. That works.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. And especially, in LA and in the comedy world, like I came to your show because of Dan Black. So I'm friends with Dan and Christina.
Yeah.
And it was a sex shop show. So I was like, absolutely. Fun fact, it was also a day, it's like how do I say this on the podcast? It's a commemorative day for me. Let's just say that January 3rd, and I'll tell you offline what it is afterwards.
Sure, yeah.
But it was kind of one of those things. And then I saw Dan was doing your show, and I was like, Dan is doing a show in a sex shop on this day. This is the thing that I need to go do. It was like so perfect and delightful.
Oh, great.
It's a great show.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you were just at the last show, which was the 13-year anniversary show. Or excuse me, 12-year anniversary.
12.
Yeah, that's still a lot. But
that's so many.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's funny because 2 years, it literally stopped. It stopped in March 2020. It was that the week that the pandemic was starting to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
The shutdown happened about 4 days after that.
Yeah.
So that was the last show I actually did before the pandemic. And then, so that was March 2020, and then it started up again in April 2022. So it actually started back up on the month it would have resumed 2 years before.
That's wild.
So the first show back was the anniversary show, but I kept that one more low key. This one was more like the celebration.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, you've been back a few times, so I think that speaks to the quality of the show.
I mean, listen, sex and comedy, like those are just the two things that
Absolutely.
go well in all of our worlds, but especially mine. So I love and appreciate that show. And I love how you gave everybody toys. People left with things. We did a great raffle.
I almost overcompensated to make up for last year of not giving anything away, because the first show back was also my first month back at doing comedy, which I've been doing comedy long enough that it took 2 minutes in one show to get my footing back. It wasn't like a tough thing to get back, but running that show in particular, I was like, okay, I'm really kind of on, my brain's functioning in a bunch of different ways. So when I met with them this year for the anniversary show, I was like, we got to give away a lot more stuff. And so it was more closer to what I used to do, with like playing games to giving them away, though at the same time there was like a bit of a time crunch, so I couldn't do as much as I usually do. It's funny because it was still pretty like a very fun night, but it was still actually restrained in terms of how I would do an anniversary show for myself.
Yeah.
So but yeah, it was really, really fun. So, and there's no signs of like in terms of the next show, I know at some point there's going to be like some changes with the show. I'm not going to say what they are yet, but yeah, they're going to be a lot of fun stuff.
Ooh, yeah. How did you get started doing that show?
I used to host a podcast called The Morning After years ago. This was like, I did it basically I started it about a year into doing stand-up. I hosted it with a very close friend of mine named Jake Weissman, who is also a stand-up. And
he was one of the showrunners on This Fool.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And he and I started together. We're very close friends. And so I had approached him and said, hey, do you want to do a podcast where we interview performers in the adult industry and make it the way we pitched it at the time was the opposite of Howard Stern is what we called it. But people have to remember that that's before Howard Stern had his heart attack or whatever he had, where I don't know how aware people are of this, but he like had a whole reevaluation where he changed his interview style and his whole show. But at the time it was like the Wild West, where he would, it was just a wild show. And even he speaks to that, obviously. But all that tangent to say, he was like, yeah, I would love to, because we both had a lot of jokes about watching porn in our sets and stuff like that, but like jokes where the joke was on us rather than, and so we started the show, and one of the performers we had on was visiting from San Francisco. She worked with a very popular studio at the time. I don't know if they're I'm sure they're still doing well, but they're known as kink.com.
Oh.
And at the time, they were like the specialty BDSM website. They were the website that basically was everything but just like vanilla sex. And so she was visiting, and she specifically said, when the show is over, when we're done recording, if you could drop me off at the Pleasure Chest, because I'm doing a workshop there, and the venue does a lot of workshops, and they do great workshops. They used to do them like a few times a month, and I think they're
bringing them back. Yeah, they're
slowly,
working on
but
it.
yeah. And so so I dropped the performer off there, and I looked around. I was like, this would make for a good comedy show. So I sat with that for a few months, and then I contacted the venue, and they were like, we'd absolutely be interested in this, and that's it. And then from that point, one launched in Chicago. They had a performance anxiety at the Pleasure Chest there for a few years.
Yes.
And then the pandemic hit. The show went away for 2 years, and then it came back, and I'm glad it did. I met up with them when it felt like I waited, because I had a feeling that Omicron was. I didn't know Omicron was going to happen, but I had a feeling there was going to be like a wave or a shutdown of some kind. So I didn't want to start it up and then have to stop again. That actually, for me creatively, would be more psychically damaging.
Oh, yeah.
So I then just taking a few more months off, already a 18-month break. So yeah. And then when I met with them, they were like, yeah, let's do it next month. And so we started it right back up.
It's so fun, and you get such great talent in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's really, it seems like there are people that have played that show that I know, and there are people that have played that show that I don't know. And it seems like you get a really good mixture of veterans and newbies.
Yes, that's very important to me, because I do, and it's hard because it's a monthly show, so you can only book so many people per month. Like, really, I wish I could book more. I have a constant anxiety about like, there are people who are like, hey, I reached out to you a few months, almost a year ago, and sometimes it takes that long to book people. But yeah, I do try to get like people who I know, who would obviously. Because the thing is, people are getting a show, they're getting free beer, they're getting a discount on stuff, and all that's cool. But I think that it's just as important to have a good show, obviously.
Yeah.
And so that's my favorite part of it, is I try to have somebody. It doesn't always work that way because of the monthly process, but I try to at least have at least one or two people that have not done the show before, whether it's a veteran or not. I actually learned since the pandemic, when reaching out to people who reached out, who I used to book regularly prior to the pandemic, who doesn't even live here anymore. That was how I learned, like, some people don't even live in LA.
I mean, that was the thing, because so many people moved or shifted out of things or into things. And, like, there were so many changes that happened in those 3 years.
Yeah.
And for me, I was working this crazy job in the pandemic in television, where I had zero time. So it was like this weird vortex of, I'm just like in this bubble, and like I don't know what happened to anybody, because I didn't have time to talk to anybody.
Yeah, and I also used to juggle those things a lot better, and now I can only do one thing at a time, which is probably how we're supposed to do things. But I do remember that it used to be easier to just be in the thick of it and have a rotation of comics, and now, like, I'm halfway starting from scratch, and also making sure I get people who are, submitting now as well. It's like a weird, and it's not that I necessarily have to do it that way, but I like to do it that way if I can. I think just overall having, what really works about the show more than anything else, even just as much as that combo works.
Ruby likes to jump up on things.
That's my little classic cat behavior. The comics that, well, it's not just the comics. What I was going to say was, I think that the venue being what it is, makes people a lot more comfortable to just enjoy the show. Like, if you've already set foot in a sex shop to watch a stand-up show, you're going to have a good time.
Yeah. And you're already a certain kind of person.
Right.
Like, you're going to be an open person. You're there. You're psyched about the discount, I would hope. It's 15%, 15, not 50.
Classic, my favorite line to say.
And let me tell you, every time I come to a show, I do use that discount, and I purchase something every time.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because it's not, I have said it before on stage, but it sometimes isn't cheap.
No.
To be kinky. It can
No.
be, but if you want to, there are certain things you want to try or do.
Yeah.
That's a great way to like genuinely save some big bucks.
Yeah, good quality. I mean, you want good quality with your sex toys, with
Right.
anything that's touching your body, anything that's going into your body.
Absolutely.
And different people have different types of allergies. All of
Yeah.
the different toys are made with different types of materials. So it makes sense that they are expensive, and also hopefully you're going to use them a lot.
Yeah. Well, I hope that also, like, what I learned is how much it like caters to certain demographics too, because there are like names of lubes that it's almost like they strictly want to sell to a certain
Totally.
audience, which
Hmm.
is very funny. But also like that's how it should be,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Speak to your people. If you
Right,
speak
right,
to everyone, you
exactly.
speak to no one.
Well, it's funny because now like you can go to, from my understanding, I've never actually looked in the aisles to check, but from my understanding, you can go to like Target and CVS and buy
Yeah.
like entry level toys.
Hmm.
Um,
Ralph's too. I was in Ralph's yesterday and I saw a little vibrator. I was like, oh,
whoa,
hey.
yeah. I mean, why wouldn't
Yeah.
they? You know,
Normalize it.
but at the same time, like the advantage of going to a venue like that is you're gonna get something that's a little more specific, and like you
Yeah.
said, where it's the more specific you get, the more it's for everyone.
Well,
So
not all sex toys are made equal. And
correct.
depending on what you're doing, what you want to feel, if you want to do it, if you want it done to you, if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
playing by yourself, if
exactly.
you're playing with a friend, or, like there's just or a bunch of friends,
Yeah.
you know,
But that's what makes it like what yeah, exactly. So it's like it really is like something for everyone kind of
yeah,
thing. So
yeah. And it's a
that's
great, great shop. I mean, I'm a
yeah,
huge Pleasure Chest fan. I
same.
think that they have great management. I think that their staff is incredible. They're super open,
Mhm.
knowledgeable, helpful.
For real, that's the part that really I love about that place too, because they truly know their stuff inside and out.
Hmm.
Like whenever I ask them about stuff, whenever I'm buying anything there, they're like, "Oh yeah, well if you want, this is the one for."
Yeah.
What I've also learned there is the more casually a toy is available, like even if it's a more complicated or say more like a pricier item,
Hmm.
it's still packaged in a way that isn't showing off.
Yeah.
And I've noticed the ones that are sold at sex shops in general now, because I was in when I was touring at one point, I remember I was at a shop and it was the same thing where the flashier it is, it's almost not uh I don't know how else to describe it, but it's almost like the difference of like, you're getting a sturdy Corolla versus like a
Yeah.
flashy car that's going to give you a lot of problems. I've noticed that when they show me stuff, they're like, well, that one, that's a popular item, but it has this fancy packaging. And they're like, well, go here. And then they'll take me to this aisle where it's like a lot more nondescript. And suddenly that it feels like you're buying like something that's going to last a lot more mileage.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to compare it to people, which I will,
Yeah.
it's like if there's some dude running around being like, "I give the best orgasms, I'm the best fuck."
Right.
It's like
Right.
I will never touch you, sir.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right,
you
exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's a good way
you
of putting it,
do
actually.
not know
Yeah,
what you're doing, and I could guarantee that
that's
it's the
absolutely the
quiet
best.
one in the corner that's
Yeah.
just like, "Yeah, man. I mean, I'll just use my hands. It's fine." And then you're like, "Oh my god, yes, you will."
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually the perfect way to. That's like the perfect comparison.
We love that. So tell me, where did you grow up?
South Florida.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I was born in North Miami, but I was raised. So elementary school I went to was in Hollywood, Florida, and
Mhm.
then I moved a little north of that to Fort Lauderdale. Kind of technically the city name's Oakland Park, but it's easier to say Fort
Yeah.
Lauderdale. And that's where I went to middle and high school.
From Hollywood to Hollywood.
Yeah, every time. That's
You
right.
just a Hollywood hoe. We
Yeah,
love that.
absolutely.
What do you remember about sex education in school?
So I thought about this a lot when you asked me to do the podcast. Like when I was reading the description and we booked the date, I was like, okay, what? I had to like do a little bit of digging there. And so something that I would preface with is that South Florida is when it comes to sociopolitical stuff there, actually just about everything across the board, it's not as conservative as like what Florida's reputation is. I guess it is a
Hmm.
swing state still. That
Yeah.
hasn't changed. Well, the swing part comes from primarily where I'm from, which is Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and sometimes Palm Beach. But the more because that's where Mar-a-Lago is, I feel like that probably had an uptick in conservatism.
Mm.
Um, uh, that's really not based on anything other than from what I remember when I lived there. But I haven't lived there in 15 years, so
Yeah.
obviously a lot could have changed. But I know that Broward and Dade County, the two that I spent the most time in, those are more, they go back and forth every election. Usually if it comes down to Florida, that those are the two counties that it comes down to.
It's all the Jews from New York.
Yeah, well, that
I would know. I'm a Jew from
yeah,
New York.
yeah.
My parents now live there.
Yeah, it's a lot of snowbirds. That's what we call them.
Yeah.
But it's also a lot of, I mean, there's also a lot of, because there's a lot of immigration.
Yeah.
And a lot of, so a lot of conservatism from down there comes from religion rather than economic benefits, particularly when it comes to like abortion and same-sex marriage or any kind of marriage equality in general, I should say. And I remember so my first, I guess all that, and also very famously, by the way, that was where Two Live Crew had their, for people who don't know, was a very, very raunchy rap group from the late 80s to the early 90s, and which Uncle Luke still lives down there. He apparently coaches a like high school football team or something.
Good for him.
Yeah, he's like the defensive coach or something, or coordinator. But they had a very famous case there for obscene lyrics, and it was like a whole free speech trial in Broward County, specifically where I'm from, very close to where I'm from.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, it was around 1990, I want to say, but which I believe was that after that they put out an album called As Nasty as They Want to Be.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great free speech case. So it's funny because when people talk about free speech, they never talk about that.
Yeah.
They talk about it. So anyway, so all that to say, the reason I brought all that up was because that's around. So I was very, very young when that happened. I can remember it on a very just tangible level, but not in terms of like what that case was about. So when I was in elementary school and middle school and the very beginning of high school, that was the Clinton era. So, but most of my high school era was the Bush administration. So it's very important because those are the two, like there was sex education and there was abstinence education. So I experienced both of them. I was actually very lucky. The bulk of it was sex education.
Yeah.
And then there's human sexuality in college that I also took, and I'll get into that. Like, I'll try to do this as linearly as possible.
Yeah.
But when I was in 5th grade, we didn't have a full discussion about sexual intercourse or anything. But at that age, you're about 11 years old. They did start talking about puberty to us, very lightly. But I remember it was still talked about, and then in middle school is when sex education ramped up for us, mostly in 7th and 8th grade. I remember 6th grade, it was a little like, I think it was kind of a similar thing where they talked more about puberty than they did about anything else. And then, 7th grade, we had a talk. I got lucky. I had a very progressive teacher. So it was part of the sex education was part of the science class.
Yeah.
Because it was the for when we got to biology.
Yeah.
So she, when we had it was for 1 week, they showed us what a human birth looks like. It really was like that birds and bees conversation. It was very, very light until she got to that, and then everybody in the class was like, "Oh, what the fuck?"
Where did that come from?
Yeah. You see it. Yeah, you don't even. I remember when you first see it, you don't even realize that the crowning is the crowning.
Yeah.
You don't actually know what you're looking at. It was like it's like you're looking at one of those like 3D optical things, and then suddenly it comes into focus. And so we were all like, "Oh," and then. And I realized,
haven't even seen a vagina before.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not even called a vagina.
So we were like, so she, after that, kind of went through the textbook stuff, but remember on the last day, she had a real big conversation about condoms and using condoms. And I don't like, as far as I can remember with middle school, having sex in middle school at my age was still pretty, and this was the mid 90s, mid to late 90s. It was still pretty, that was considered like the big person on campus if they fucked. It really wasn't until, for most of my, generationally speaking, at least with my group, it was mostly that happened in high school.
Yeah.
But there were a few people in middle school who did happen, but it was very mythical.
Yeah.
But still, everyone was, obviously dealing with now being able to, discovering everything about their bodies and such. And porn had just started to become a little accessible on the dial-up level, so you could see pictures and
the
dial-up days.
porn.
Yeah. So it was
Oh my
pictures
God.
or like 7-second clips, and learning how to take the tabs, how to like erase your history. That was still like just becoming new information.
Oh yeah.
So I had to be very careful with that. But
did you ever have one of those scramblers for like pay-per-view?
Oh yeah, of course. That was a
and
big
you'd,
one.
like,
Yeah,
scramble,
yeah.
see like a boob here
And
and
then
there.
you'd
And
see,
you're like,
yeah,
oh my
yeah,
God, it's
exactly.
not it.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally it would like come through completely for like 10 seconds. And oh, that was close.
I'm gonna check that camera.
I think it's good. I think you're
Okay.
yeah, I think you're good.
Okay, great.
From as far as I can tell from here. It looks
Oh no, that's not it.
Oh, that's
You keep talking.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That's so funny.
She did shift it.
Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, this is your MacBook. Sorry to break the fourth wall on this. I just realized
We
this
got tech people. You can check this out on YouTube if you want to see the chaos. The Ruby chaos.
So on the last day of that portion of the curriculum, she gave us a real full-on conversation about condoms, and she didn't have anyone like put one on a banana or anything like that, but she did go very into detail about it. And she's like, look, I can't tell you to, she's like, all I'm asking is you guys use protection. It was like a very big plea. And it had the feeling in retrospect that this isn't something every class got.
Mm-hmm.
She was much more, I realized she was probably a much more progressive teacher compared to having to do it, but it was, yeah, for 7th and 8th grade, I remember sex education being pretty like explicit, or at least very frank, I should say. And then in 9th grade, so that was the last year, that was the election year.
Oh.
So for our class, I remember, and I think this was in 8th grade as well, they started showing movies that dealt with teen pregnancy.
Oh, those cheesy ones.
Yeah, and
real bad ones.
Yeah. Some of them. So the ones I remember that were actual, like, there was For Keeps was the big one that they showed, which was a movie that played like in theaters. That wasn't just like a lot of these that they showed weren't like PSA style movies. They showed a few of those, but a lot of them were that. And I remember the focus shifted because they also had started talking about STDs at that point.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of went away with the abstinence education. And that's when they were only showing pregnancy. That was why they were starting to push that stuff. And I remember in 10th grade, it was exclusively abstinence only education from then onward. So it was always like pregnancy movies exclusively. It wasn't just like one pregnancy movie.
Yeah, because I was thinking, oh my God, the older Bush, and then I don't even know my.
Well, Jeb Bush was the
no, not Jeb. Oh, Jeb was the governor
of Florida
right?
at the time. Yeah. So
I was thinking you went from George to Clinton, but you were talking Clinton to George W.
Yes,
and that is a substantial change.
Very,
because during the Clinton era, Jocelyn, oh God, I can't remember her last name, but she is the one that introduced, he fired her actually, but she's the one that wanted sex education and masturbation to be a part of sex education in schools, and really just talked about like, hey, kids need to know how their bodies work. And she was fired for that.
Well, of course she was.
Of course she was. And she was a black woman. So of course,
well,
it's just terrible. All of it.
That's like, I wish people could look back on the Clinton years with no rose-colored glasses whatsoever. But that said, I think that I just remember how there was still enough of a dynamic change, because I do think some of that was probably left to the teachers. And I remember when it got to the more conservative side, where it was just abstinence only education, one teacher did the same thing where he's like, well, we only teach abstinence only education now. That's what he specifically made a point. It was a guy, I remember. He specifically made a point of being like, just so you know, we're not allowed to teach sex education. So I can't tell you that you could go out and get a condom. He started speaking in like negatives to be like, to kind of be like, using a condom is protection, that it can also prevent STDs. I can't tell you those things anymore. I can't tell you that. And he just kept speaking that way. And that was also very cool.
Hero.
Yeah.
That man is a hero.
But, I also think about that where I'm like, at the time, I wonder how much. Oh shit.
No. Oh no.
Those things are designed. You're good, but it's still.
This is the chaos
Yeah.
show. Oh my God. You keep going. You keep
You
going.
sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
All right.
cool.
All right. All right.
The show doesn't
The show
stop.
must go on,
The
as they
show
say in
must go
Hollywood. Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, because this is getting dragged. If you want to put that over there, perfect. I'm trying to think where. Oh yeah. So the teacher gave us like a. Are you sure you want me to just keep going? Oh, okay. Okay. Cool. So we were told to after that they did something completely different for the last 2 years. Well, I actually don't remember for my senior year because I graduated a semester early, not for like good grades. Yeah, I just got
We
out
got
of
a
there.
Smartie on our hands.
Nope.
Nope.
I had enough credits, and I knew I wasn't going to get into a good college, so I graduated a semester early to start community college sooner.
Oh,
Yeah,
my brother did that. And I
yeah,
had a lot of
yeah.
friends that did that actually.
And I was
Very
very
strategic.
yes, it was one of the best decisions I ever made because I got to finish college early too. So I didn't get to my senior year. I didn't actually have any abstinence education, but I remember my junior year they took us. What they did for the whole class was we went to an auditorium and they worked it into some kind of thing about like depression and like they did a whole yeah, it was like this comprehensive seminar where they snuck it in for 15 minutes. And because I think at the time that was when school shootings were on the rise. So they were probably trying to find some way to address mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And they made these videos that had like cool music videos in between, whatever the big artists were at the time. And it was very, very stupid. It was very, very dumb. But
kind of like Dare.
yeah, very
like, what are you
like
doing?
it's absolutely what it was. It was just a more stylized version of Dare, and it was terrible. But they included it in there, um and it sucked. Yeah, there's not. It's weird. It's like the more I think back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's really kind of just weird that I lived through these two vortexes of sex education, and there were still students that were in my grade that were pregnant, and clearly it wasn't working. So then I remember. I mean, a lot of thankfully, I had a pretty progressive household.
Yeah,
That's what saved me.
Yeah.
I was raised by my mom and my sister. My sister's 10 years older than me, so that was basically having a second mom.
Mine too.
Yeah,
13,
and so as a that's the only parents I had in the household.
Yeah.
So they were pretty frank about that stuff. They started. My mom had to talk with me at around 7th and 8th grade twice. Well, the first time because I asked about it because I said we had a sex education class, so she was like, okay, well, And then I remember in 9th grade, my sister kind of had to talk with me and gave me like condoms and just in case. And I remember I'm like, oh, that was very strategic of them. I realize now that they clearly my mom was like, okay, now you need to talk to him about it because you're obviously the cooler one right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was and probably more comfortability, which yes, because if you have a sibling that's 10 years older than you, that's going to be the coolest person in the room.
Yeah.
No matter how many friends you have in high school or whatever that are older and cooler. So I got lucky in that regard as well. Whereas I had friends who their parents didn't have those talks with them.
No, mine did not.
Yeah.
There was no conversations for me.
Yeah. They weren't very like only one or two of the conversations were like real sit down conversations.
Yeah.
The rest I could ask casually. It was a pretty open door policy on that stuff.
I think that's really the best way is just like these things come up, and the more casual we can make these conversations, then it's just like, yeah, you're sitting in the car and something comes up and it's like, yeah, we're going to talk about how periods work because this is just what's happening, or we're going to talk about like what is that stuff coming out of a penis, because it's just what's just regular conversation. Same thing that you're like, well, why is that dog looking like this and this dog looks like this? Like, just normalize it.
Yeah, I think also because what I think people always don't factor into those dynamics too is that whoever the person, if you're outside of experimenting by yourself or whatever experimentation comes up, when you are hooking up with someone, both of you don't like, you're taking in another person's experience into account, and so there's no way to navigate that, and so that's really where I think the problem comes in, because a lot of people also don't have parents who are going to have those casual conversations with them, and so now you're kind of carrying the burden of that.
Yeah.
And then that obviously, though I think ultimately what's funny about that is I'm convinced because of all of this, that's why the whole like cream pie fetish became a thing.
Yeah.
And why it's like it's not even it's like partially a taboo, but it's also like a thing where I'm like, part of that I think really does come from just like, because you were told that, that what leads to pregnancy. It's literally like being a punk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's so much of like porn and everything. And to your point of when you get with different people, you're taking on their experiences, you're also taking on their shame. And you have to manage
Right,
like
right.
what shame was put on them. What do they know? What do they not know outside of like the technical skill sets and just like how their own body works? But there's just sexuality is the most normal thing that
Yeah.
every single human experiences, regardless of if you're 0 years old or if you're 100 years old
Right.
or older. And yet it's like the most taboo thing that we can talk about.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? It's
Well,
like
yeah, a
blinking.
lot of it, yeah, a lot of it has to do with this weird, and it's weird. I think that like Puritanism is having a
Oh,
moment again,
yeah. Yeah.
in a way that like it wasn't even 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I always try not to be like a nostalgia person, because I think when you look back on like that, on those eras, there was still a lot that wasn't allowed that is allowed now, or
Yeah.
at least in a more reasonable way. But at the same time, I do think it affects transgressive behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's weirdly made shit that used to be very uncool for some reason now. Like a big thing is like, there's like these like eugenics, these weird people who are like really into like the concept of like, we need to breed a lot more. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, you're talking about it like it's literally like we're in a like in a farm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because it has to do with like supposedly humanity's not going to last. And I'm like, well, why don't you teach people? Because it's weird. Like they'd have this abstinence only education thing and then wait till marriage. But then there are these people who are like, actually, scientifically, we need to produce more.
Yeah.
So like, which is it? No one's even on the same
What is
page
what?
about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, listen, it's all very Handmaid's Tale because that's the whole thing is that, it is going back to that purity culture and it is going back to like the simplicity of everything and
Yeah.
breeding and specific breeding. I mean, it's
Yeah.
wild. Also, the world is overpopulated. We're okay.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Like it's
Right.
it's
Right. There
okay that
doesn't
the
seem to
amount
be
of
a,
people
there
are not
doesn't,
having babies.
there doesn't, I mean, obviously it's very obvious why people are saying that. It's because they obviously want low class people, like
Exactly.
anyone who's in
It's
any kind of
racism,
working class. Yeah,
classism,
yeah,
all of
and
that.
all of that, and like making more people who can work at Amazon or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean
Mm-hmm.
it's very obvious.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's funny that that's the same group. You would think, I don't know, I would have thought a while ago this would have already fractured some level of conservative behavior, because it's a lot easier. I think a lot of the reasons a lot of the stuff takes hold is because it's a lot harder for and this is like a tangent, so feel free to bring it back.
No,
But
no,
I do
tangent.
think it ties to what we're talking about, which is that I think that a lot of like anyone on any kind of liberal side of things, it's a lot more fractured, because there's leftists, there's centrism, there's that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And for some reason with conservatives, even though one is like pro-life because it has to do with eugenics or whatever, and then the other one's pro-life because it has to do with religious, that still puts them on the same unified
Yeah.
page. And that's it. But it still blows my mind that at some point I thought it would have created some kind of fissure. But it
No, well, the
obviously
what is the same. It's the why that's different. And
right.
no one cares about the why when they're fighting for the same what. They're
Yeah.
like, I don't care how you got here.
Yeah,
The
that's
fact is,
true.
I mean, and you can say the same for the left side as well. It's like, I don't care what your reason is for something, but we're fighting for the same thing and we have the same beliefs. But, there is a lot more.
Well,
I agree. There's a lot more variety.
I actually think the why is why it keeps things fractured on that side. It actually
Yeah.
does work the other way, because why are we doing it this way? Well, because it needs to, some people think
Yeah.
we have to play nice, and some people are like, no, we actually need to be more extreme about, it's that kind
And
of
that's
thing.
like the strategy of it all.
Yeah, yeah,
How do we get
exactly.
there? That's the
Right.
how.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Who, what, where, why, how.
yeah, I always,
Ugh.
well, I think the how applies more to art than anything else. And
Yeah.
it is weird. So that brings it back to this, which is that I do think about that a lot when I watch, like older movies, in terms of when you're fighting for these things like reproductive rights, or you're talking about any of those things in movies. I do think the transgressiveness of it is lost now because I just don't think it's much. It's hard to make. It's very hard for me to articulate in my head because I haven't had to say it outside of my brain in a while.
Yeah.
But I think that that it doesn't allow for a lot of room for like now. I just don't think people have the luxury of being transgressive because they need to make a living off it.
Yeah.
I think the way class used to work, you used to be able to do those things a lot more.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the finances changed the way that we
Yeah.
navigate literally everything in our lives.
Right. And I don't even know where sex education stands now in schools because
It's so vast. It's state
is
by
it a state
state.
by state?
It's
Okay.
state by state. It's so different. I mean, you look at Florida where you can't say gay and you can't have conversations, and
Right.
teachers literally are getting fired for talking about periods. Like
Right.
they just passed. I forget what the legislation is exactly, but they can't really start teaching anything until after sixth grade. Kids are
Wow.
having periods. They're having
Yeah.
sexual experiences. They're having wet dreams. They're masturbating. They're doing
Right.
all of
Right.
these things. And you're not going to arm them with education on what that is.
Right.
The parents are sure as shit not going to say anything. A few select parents will. But as a whole, you're going to have a whole. I mean, if you just look at people who have uteruses, just take that as an example.
Yeah.
So now you have this whole group of people who have uteruses that are all of a sudden going to start being in pain and bleeding from their bodies,
Right.
and you're not going to teach them anything about that because, by the way, though that is going to happen between around age 9 to 11.
Yeah.
In some cases younger, in some cases older, but generally speaking, it's around 9 to 11. So now we're talking about, we're not even going to have those conversations until after that's already happened to you.
Yeah, the only time it got the best conversation, well, it's funny because it started being sex education on a more sociological level. But when I was in college, one of the last classes I took in community college, my last semester before I transferred, was human sexuality. And that was like a super progressive class. It talked about like porn. I don't know where he got this from. I just remember because this was 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and I know in college it's a little different because everyone's over 18, they're adults. Well, for the most part, they're over 18 and they're adults. And well, for that class, I know you had to be. That was like the one specific. Even if someone was like going to, because sometimes high schoolers could go to community college
Yeah.
early. I know for that class it wasn't allowed, but um, the teacher was awesome, and he had this. I remember he showed us this PBS produced thing that, as far as I know, I tried looking it up after, and I couldn't even find record of it airing at a PBS in Florida, but it was like the most comprehensive thing I'd ever seen on porn up until that point. And to the point that it talked about like every type of, they were literally like, and this was again 2005, not to say these scenes didn't already exist, but seeing it talked about this way and like something that got public funding to talk about it, they were talking about like, gangbang scenes and what working in porn really entails, and how much a performer makes versus for a guy and a girl, and all this like very nuanced stuff about the industry. And he talked very openly in class about this kind of stuff. And so I was like, wow, this is what should have been. I don't know if I mean, I don't think that whatever in terms of like, because you're paying for it obviously and you're going to school, that they can afford to have a curriculum about it. But I was like, even half of this would make a difference, having it in sex education, especially now because I was about raised only halfway on the internet. I mean, the internet didn't enter my household until middle school. I didn't have it for elementary school. And even in middle school, it was a very limited thing because it would take up the phone line. So it could only be certain hours. So it wasn't until I got to high school that I actually had like high speed internet and could access porn in any capacity where it wasn't like a small window of time.
And it was wild then. I mean, not that it's not wild now, but those early days. And what you're talking about there is porn literacy, and porn literacy is so important.
Well, now it is more than ever, I think.
Yeah.
I would argue it's like the most important thing now because it's just too accessible. I mean, there was a video, something that you could really learn from viral trends. There was a video where that people were doing on TikTok where they would use the Pornhub intro music before the clip starts to see how the person next to them would react.
Oh, wow.
It was like a joke. It was a funny thing because you would see like there was like a girl who was doing it, and she had the camera on her partner, who had his phone open and he was just scrolling for something else. and or no, I'm sorry, he had his phone down, so the music started and he looked at his phone thinking it was on, it was that kind of stuff. But then it started going the other way, where guys would do it and to see how their girls would react. And like one, it was very like binary in that sense.
Yeah.
But then it started really taking a different turn, where people would do it while their parents were there to see how their parents would react, which
Yes.
I would not want to. That's none of my business. Whatever
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's kind of a funny joke, but then I feel like that's a person who probably doesn't have the long-sightedness of that, being like, now I know that my dad watches. Not that you already don't know that, but
I would just be like, here are some better websites,
yeah,
Here's
exactly.
the ethical way to do this, but please do enjoy.
Right. But then it started, somebody posted this thing where they were like, these videos are funny up to a point, because now they were doing it where somebody would be like, their little brother would be in the room, and it was like a 12-year-old who was actually reacting to it. And they were like, well, obviously at a very young age, these people have access to porn. Yeah. So and I remember thinking, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That does speak to, that's like whether someone should be watching whatever kind of porn is you can access, versus, well, I feel like this wouldn't be a problem if that was already being talked about in school. So I don't know. I think to kind of do this tisk tisk thing about it, that's ultimately what ends up happening, is they make it like this individualistic pursuit, or this a problem. If the problem is the individual, which it's not. I don't think it is. I think the problem is that, yeah, okay, so what if a 12-year-old knows about that, then obviously there needs to be some kind of structure in place to address that to a 12-year-old.
Exactly. It's not the abstinence is never the answer. It's always
right.
Okay, why don't we just properly educate, and then they have the tools that they need to better navigate whatever situation this is, whether it's porn and figuring out what porn is good and safe to watch, or your own body, or someone else's body.
Right. And to put that on the parent is kind of weird, because not kind of, it's fucking weird.
No, it's
because
fucking weird.
Yeah, because the whole point of sending someone to school is so they can be educated.
Yeah.
Because to me, this argument might not fly with other people, but to me, it's like, well, if they have to teach them sex education, why aren't they teaching them about algebra then?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously, you can't have it both ways, in my opinion. So I just think it's weird that that's the way it's kind of addressed, because also, if it's a parent that has to work 2 jobs or is juggling, a bunch of other things, and people, again, they make this individualistic thing about it, where they're like, well, make the time. That's what being a parent is. If you don't, and that's really stupid. I also think that just that's a way for people to let themselves off the hook, to not have to address whatever it is that needs to be addressed, I think, ultimately.
Yeah. And, what are you going to sit there and teach your kid about the Civil War?
Right.
No.
Which is what they want now too, apparently.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. What an example for me to use. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, parents are not equipped for it. They're
Not
just not. It's it's a lot to put on people. So it's time for a pop quiz.
Oh, great. Let's do it.
Why are the ovaries called ovaries?
Ooh, I wish I could say that I knew. I mean, I'm guessing they're over the uterus.
Wrong. Ooh, maybe I should get a buzzer.
You should actually. Yeah,
I should. Absolutely. That'd be actually a lot of fun. Then I could be like, beep, 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 beep. Ooh, it's time for a pop quiz.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You should definitely have like a ding, a whole. I'm sure there's like a canned game show noises that you could totally bring in.
For sure. Yeah. There has to be.
So why are they called the ovaries?
Yeah. So they are called the ovaries because they house the ovum, which it's a Latin word for egg or nut.
Interesting. It's funny. I moved up to the microphone to make a face.
Yeah.
I don't know why I did that.
We appreciate that you did.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. The ovaries are called the ovaries because they house and they create the ovum, which are just eggs.
And not to be that person, but as soon as when you told me it was wrong, I was like, wait, there is an ovum. I did think that, but I was like, well, you know what? I'm wrong. I'm just going to own it.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, the reason that I'm doing the pop quiz for everyone is because it's fun, because most of this stuff is like, oh shit, I should know this. And I do somewhere, maybe in the back of it. Maybe I've read it, probably have. Yeah. Maybe saw it on a chart one day 3 decades ago.
Well, it's one of those things where like you even when you do learn that stuff, the stuff that you end up retaining is the stuff of learning the sperm meeting the egg and that kind of stuff. I got a crash course in how my plumbing works, for lack of a better term, when I did my vasectomy last year. Yeah. I completely forgot about all that stuff. And then they make you take before you get a vasectomy, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it if you've been to the show, because I've done that. I've had to run that bit a few times, but like the real version of that is that when you get the vasectomy, you have to take for as much of a pain in the ass of it is, it's like 1/10 of like what reproductive rights are on the other side of the spectrum for that. It's very, very, the whole thing is relatively easy, but they do, because it's reversible, but the reversibility of it is not guaranteed, and it's very painful and very expensive compared to a vasectomy, which is cheap, quick, and effective. They go through a whole thing of how it works and what kind of surgery they're doing. And I forgot that I was like, oh yeah, so that's how cum works. I really forgot. I was just like, I just know that it houses babies, and I don't want it to house the babies anymore.
I don't want that.
Yeah. Exactly. I just want the blanks. And so when I went to see the nurse about it, they also, when you get it done the day of, they even ask you like, how many kids do you have? None. And like, how many do you want? None. Okay. They ask you that 4 times before the procedure is done, along your little journey of like changing, getting dressed, when the doctor actually comes in to do the procedure and everything, because they're like really like, and apparently I've learned some doctors won't even do that. If you're under 30, they won't even do it.
They won't do it for women. You can't tie your tubes. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think they let you tie your tubes if you don't have kids or something like that. I mean, I think eventually you can get it done, but
but you have to be
very,
like
very
in your early
difficult.
30s. I was told the same thing kind of is really the case with vasectomies. They're a little more loosey goosey about it, but not by much, because I've heard that there are guys who try to get it done in the mid to late 20s and the doctors turned them down. And it said like, I can't do it, because if you want to reverse it, I have known I wanted it for 15 years. I was supposed to do it the year COVID hit. I had the appointment and everything for that month. And then the next year, when everyone got vaccinated, I rescheduled, and they were like, oh yeah, anyone who had to cancel that month is like on the priority list. So when do you want to come in? So I was like, right away.
Immediately, please.
Yeah, I was like, let's get this over with. So yeah, but I think that it is funny that doing this podcast now, I realize I'm like, wow, I forgot I learned all that. I did learn that while Clinton was still in office and we were allowed to do sex education. And again, not romanticizing that period of time politically, but it was a thing where I was like, oh yeah, I did learn about that. And then they didn't teach us about any of that when the abstinence only education started. They just started showing us movies about people getting pregnant,
which is just so wild.
Yeah, and I think I don't remember what the other movie. I remember one was For Keeps. I just don't remember what the other one was. I'm probably going to remember it when we stop recording. That's how that always works.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. But that's so interesting that they showed you just like regular ass movies. It just like had to do with sex and
that's
romance.
how that used to be a much more common thing, like the way movies would be shown in classes, because they would show like
that's true.
They would show like if there was a movie about anything that had to do with like anything scientific, they would, and I think the idea was that rather than just making it textbooks, showing a modern movies like hip and cool.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea. And it's not, but it's at the same time, it gets around being like just a casual movie, like that they show on the last day of school, for example, because that's usually what happens on the last week of school. They just show whatever's PG or PG-13 that they're allowed to show.
Big old cart.
Right. Yeah, exactly. At the TV, plug it in.
Yep.
I remember I was like the movie guy in middle school. And so the big movie at the time was The Wedding Singer. So I bought in a copy, and the teacher was like, well, I have to watch this to clear it. So she watched it the night before. She goes, man, I love that movie. I can't show it to you guys. And we're like, what? And she's like, yeah, the way they talk at certain scenes. I'm like, and I realized later, I'm like, oh, that's her. I thought that was her being too conservative. And then I remember my mom told me, she's like, well, her job's on the line. So whatever, you guys have to, if she's cool with showing it, then that's a bonus. But if not, well, then, you're not paying her bills. I remember that's what my mom told me.
Your mom knew all of it. What's up?
Yeah. No, again, cool. I had a cool mom, cool sister that really, I was very spoiled in that regard. But like I said, I know a lot of my close friends, they weren't.
Yeah. I think the vast majority of us weren't. I mean, I too was really lucky. I call her my sister mom friend.
Good.
Because it's true. I mean, when they're so much older than you have that person that has experience. So they have the wherewithal to give you good, solid, safe advice, but they're also a safe person because they're your sibling. And because there's such a massive age difference, so my brother was the same age difference between you and your sister.
Oh, okay.
Because he was the middle one. There's such a big difference in age that a lot of those general sibling dynamics aren't there.
Right.
So you really get like the best of so many different worlds, I think.
Well, and also I think her being the older sister than an older brother makes a big difference. I think there's a lot of parts of that math equation that really worked in my favor, because having an older sibling is already the advantage. But if it's a guy, that could be a little different, because it depends on if they have any hangups with women and so on. But yeah, so I was really lucky in that way. Doesn't mean it doesn't come, just for so people understand, doesn't mean it doesn't come with its own set of how you view things, and it certainly informs things. But I think on the as far as that scale goes, I'm definitely on the best possible class of what that could be.
Here's to all the big sisters.
Yeah.
The awesome big sisters.
Yeah.
Great. So before we get to where people can find you, is there anything else that you want to share that I maybe didn't ask you about?
I was thinking about, I remember on the walk over, I was like, is there anything else in regards to all this stuff that would be worth talking about? And where you do kind of get, one thing that I do think about with sex education that does factor in is, depending on who your friends are, that also is very educational, because whoever has sex first, second, third, like that whole lineup, it becomes like a thing in high school where that's where you learn a lot.
Yeah.
And the way people talk about sex. I also got really lucky in that a lot of my friends weren't shy talking about that stuff in a way that they weren't pretending to be like, because I remember a period in middle school, at the very end of middle school in 8th grade, that if you masturbated, you were weird. That turned into
especially
stigma.
As girls.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. See
Mm-mm.
amongst guys, it was also weird. And then I remember by the time you got to 9th grade, everybody was talking about, very casually, at least the people I knew were very open about talking about, masturbating just across the board. It wasn't really like a weird thing for anybody. But I think part of that was because porn did become a little more accessible, even at that age. So it did lead to a little more openness.
Yeah.
Because I think if it had been a few years before that, where it was still magazines, borrowing magazines, which was a thing, I did have the first time I saw porn was definitely not on the internet. It was definitely on TV. One of my friends had one of the cable boxes that descrambled, and so we would watch. And then another friend found his parents' stash of porno tapes and magazines. So there was always it was always there. It did have a little bit more of, like, I guess the one thing to make nostalgic out of it is it did have a sacredness to it. But I think that part of it's as much sex education as what you got in school. I do think that's part of it, because there's only so much, even if it's available in school, which it should be, and it should be a very frank thing. Because I do remember also, you could, early on in high school, I remember they did have condoms were available if you asked. You had to ask for them, though, which is
a lot to put on a kid.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot.
It is. I know in college they just have a thing where you can go in and grab them.
Yeah, like a grab bag.
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
have at it, kiddo.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's a sticker too.
Which is funny, because they were always the worst looking condoms possible. They always had they were like orange.
Those motherfuckers were definitely breaking. Like, they were cheap condoms. If you're gonna give condoms away, please give.
Or they weren't like lubricated or something. Like,
I mean, listen, it's better than nothing for sure.
Yeah,
and if you're too scared to go and buy one, then absolutely, like, having it accessible is key, and it's essential, and we support it. But also, I never wanted to use those. I was like, that shit looks dodgy.
Yeah, yeah.
Did someone poke holes in that? I don't know. But again, better than nothing. And I'm very sure that I have used them.
Right. Yeah, I think that was it. That was the other thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, it's the community. I mean, it takes a village for sure.
It really does. I mean, yeah, I think everybody has their own, I think that, like, also because now there's so many more available ways to classify sexuality. But that's the other thing that never even came up in school. The idea of anything same sex didn't come up. And it's not that it was even, I looking back, I'm like, is it that it wasn't recognized, or was it just that because of where the culture was at, that they could barely get cisgendered straight sexuality across the board? Like, I don't even know what the limitation was. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
I think it was a lot of homophobia,
right? Okay.
Especially because when we grew up, it was the AIDS era.
Yeah,
also,
Oh, yeah,
like
that
90s.
Too.
So like there was a lot of homophobia. So they were for sure not going to be teaching us anything. And by the way, lesbians were not even remotely considered or a part of the conversation. It was straight people and gay men. That's it.
Well,
forget about bi.
As far as I even remember, even that, like any sexuality for a woman that didn't involve guys was like a Maxim magazine style.
Totally.
Like, oh, this is just being cool and hot. but that's not what they actually like, that kind of stuff. That was like, at best, that's
or it
what
was
that
roommates, you know, like
Right,
that were asexual, and not, which asexual relationships are
yeah,
completely valid,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, it's
I mean, that wasn't even back
no, that
then.
was
That
not.
was like so far even from if you bought that up, that was like considered like an anomaly.
I don't even know. I don't even know when we had the term. I got to look into that. But yeah. Wow, wow, wow. So
Yeah.
tell us, where can people find you?
At Eli Olsberg on all the socials. That's just my name with the @ sign right in front of it. And so if you go on any of the websites like Twitter, if it's still around by the time this comes out,
Who
or
knows?
Instagram, yeah, if it's Instagram, you can either just search my full name, one word, or put a slash on the web browser. And my podcast, Closure, the podcast that never ends, will be coming back at some point this year. I've gotten a few requests for that, so just hopefully that answers for anyone listening.
Amazing. And you will be linked in the old show notes below.
Please, yes, thank you.
This is going to be published, aired, whatever we call it in podcasting, in June. So I think it's going to be after your show. But when would your June show ish be?
Well, all the shows are always, with the exception of like 1 or 2 shows a year, if there's like some logistical thing where we need to move it based on anything from the venue or myself. Show's always the second Tuesday of every month. If you're in LA, it's at the Pleasure Chest, second Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m. If you follow me on any of the socials, I always post about it. And also, that's also where I post any of my other dates where I perform around town or around the country. I think by the time this comes out, I'll have already finished a little jaunt on the road. So the next batch will probably be up by then.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Oh my gosh, Arielle, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. What a great talk.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I can't wait to see your next show, the second Tuesday of every month.
Yeah.
At the Pleasure Chest.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Birds and Bees Don't Fuck. If you like this podcast, why not leave me a 5-star review? Tell your friends, share, like, subscribe, do all of the things that you know you should do because podcasts have been around for a very long time. And if you have a question that you would like me to ask one of our guests for our pop quiz, go ahead and leave that with your 5-star review and you will get a shout out on the podcast. Thanks again for listening. Practice safe sex, prioritize pleasure, love each other, and take care of yourselves. Okay, love you. Bye.